Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today, in our 505th episode, we've got a whole bunch of news.
Oh yes, we're unraveling various mysteries, like there's a comprehensive review of dome-headed animals. There's also a mystery hadrosaur Mississippi, and a solved mystery of what were thought to be dinosaur bones in the UK. Plus, we have listener questions to answer.
We also have our Dino-It-All challenge.
And of course, the dinosaur of the day. This week it's Saurornithoides, a troodon. And our fun fact, we can eat grapes and raisins and drink wine thanks to the non-avian dinosaurs going extinct. So, thank you.
Is it because we're here, or is it more complicated than that?
Oh, good point. No, there's more to it than we're just here at the same time as grapes.
So I was thinking we can do a lot of things because the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct, because otherwise we probably wouldn't have evolved.
I hadn't thought of it that way.
But before we get into all of that, as always, we want to thank some of our patrons. And this week we have a new patron to thank. They recently upgraded, and that patron is David. Thank you very much for bumping up to the Triceratops level where you get a shout out. And then rounding out our shout outs, we've got Dilophosaurab, Coenosaurus, Amber, John, Wouter, Morgan Eklov, Rhinosaurus, Ankylosaurus, and Miriam.
Yay, thank you so much for being a Dino-It-All and being part of this dino-loving community. And if you want to join and you get perks like shout-outs or ad-free episodes or extended interviews and a lot of other cool stuff, then join our Patreon at patreon.com/iknowdino. Jumping into the news, as I promised, there was this review of what it meant to have a dome head and to headbutt as a pachycephalosaurid and other prehistoric animals.
Something that's been very contentious for a long time. Did Pachycephalosaurus really butt heads? Did they butt flanks? Did they bump horns on the back of their heads?
Yes.
A lot of potential options. Would it have broken their necks?
This doesn't quite get into that. It's more like it's looking at all of the past studies and synthesizing it, and also making sure going forward we're using clear language to discuss it. It was published by Carrie Woodruff and Nicole Ackermans in the Anatomical Record. And I will say, when I saw this and I saw Carrie Woodruff, I thought, this is the kangaroo study that I've been waiting 2 years for. But it's not.
Kangaroo posture related.
Well,
that we can't say too much about.
No. There is an article published about the abstract on Live Science, which we can link to if you want to learn more what kangaroos and pachycephalosaurs have in common. But that one's coming. It was briefly mentioned in this paper. Anyway, so what does headbutting really mean? When I was reading this paper, it was kind of like, oh, that's like the semi-aquatic term in the Spinosaurus debate.
Like, how hard do you have to hit heads in order for it to count as headbutting?
Yeah, also, are you butting heads, or are you using your head to butt other parts of the body?
Oh, head to head versus head to flank?
Yeah, and how fast are you going, and just all kinds of details. So, like bighorn sheep, warthogs, bison, they all headbutt, but they have different skulls, and they each combat in different ways. So like I said, this paper looks at the history and the reasons of headbutting in dome-headed fossils and modern animals, and they propose a new set of protocol or rules for using specific terms around headbutting. We talk about this a lot. We just don't know too much about animal behavior from their fossils alone. So the next best thing is to compare prehistoric animals to modern animals and hypothesize how those prehistoric animals behaved. And one hypothesis, of course, is that pachycephalosaurids hit each other with their domed heads, similar to how bighorn sheep headbutt with their curled horns. But obviously, the horns are very different from the pachycephalosaur heads.
Yeah, but they might give a similar sort of surface because they curl up and down, sort of up out of their head and then back down towards the side. So it gives that sort of curved surface when they're lined up.
Yeah, well, with male bighorn sheep, they'll run full speed at each other and lunge often with their back legs or launch into each other and bring their horns together.
Yeah, they're very intense.
Yeah, it involves a lot of striking and contacting surfaces. But there's also a question of like, how fast does this happen? Is it high or low velocity? And also, like I said earlier, headbutting could mean you butting two heads together, or using your head to strike any other part of your opponent. There's also flank butting. Frontal pushing is another term, frontal ramming. So the term headbutting can be a bit vague. And domed heads are obviously fairly unique. And with dinosaurs, we think of pachycephalosaurs most often. There's two modern animals with comparable domed heads to pachycephalosaurs. There's the white-bellied duiker, a small antelope species, and the helmeted hornbill, which is a large bird with a casque, and that looks like a helmet. And there are other birds with casques, like the cassowary, but they're not the same. They're lightweight compared to the helmeted hornbill casque that's thick and dense, which at first glance you might not realize.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought of a hornbill as having a dome head, because I think there's some keratin that comes off of it in a way that gives it a different sort of look, like a horn, as the name implies.
Well, so for the helmeted hornbill, they can fly into each other, they'll strike those casques, and the strikes can be so forceful that both birds are thrown backwards.
Oh, really? I had no idea that there were birds that headbutted like that.
Yeah. And then there's also animals like the green humphead parrotfish, which can grow up to almost 5 feet or 1.5 meters long, and the northern bottlenose whale, which is a beaked whale. There's also some ceratopsians like Pachyrhinosaurus that had these large bosses on the nasal and above the eyes, with dense bone that was over 25 centimeters thick, or almost 10 inches.
Okay. So in that case, it might be a little bit more like rhinos bumping horns, I guess. I don't know if they do that.
Living up to its name, the Pachyrhinosaurus.
Yeah.
And in Pachycephalosaurs, the domes were also dense and could be over 25 centimeters thick, or almost 10 inches.
Has quite a dense dome.
Right? What else could they be doing with these domes? So there was a 2019 study by Kulik and Sidor that found, by comparing histology and CT scans, that pachycephalosaurids didn't have as much vascular tissues, so lots of blood vessels, as they got older. And being more vascular would mean more tissue growth, or faster growing, and more maintenance. And having less means just less responsive tissues. So as pachycephalosaurs got older, they had less blood tissues, and that would mean that the tissue growth didn't grow as fast, was less responsive.
Okay. And it needed less maintenance, did you say?
Yeah, so I guess that kind of plays into this headbutting idea, which the idea of pachycephalosaurs headbutting actually didn't come from scientific papers. It started back in 1955 with Colbert's popular natural history narrative, Evolution of the Vertebrates, A History of the Backbone Animals Through Time, which said, perhaps, as a very wild surmise, the skull was used as a sort of battering ram.
So it was just sort of a out there hypothesis that he acknowledged as being not even very likely.
Yes, but this idea became popular because it was included in L. Sprague de Camp's sci-fi short story, A Gun for Dinosaur, which came out the next year. And in that story, there's a group that travels in time to hunt big game, and they see male pachycephalosaurs butting heads while fighting over females. It wasn't until 1970 that the hypothesis for headbutting first appeared in a scientific article, and that was with Peter Galton, who compared pachycephalosaur headbutting to sheep butting. And Galton said he was inspired by the A Gun for Dinosaur story.
This is one of those sci-fi informing science and vice versa.
And they build on top of each other. He also said that the spikes and the knobs on the dome seemed ineffective for defense, so it was likely that the dome was used for interspecies competition. And they compared them to sheep and goats. And then just came more papers on the domes. There were some that hypothesized the dome helped with exchanging heat. Others thought it was more of a battering ram with the head-to-head, but some flank butting. Bob Bacher and the Dinosaur heresies proposed the domes were like football helmets, but thought it was more about the flank butting. And some thought that the spongy bone of the dome would help absorb some of that impact.
Okay, but then you were saying as they got older, it got less spongy. We might not have had all those fossils immediately to compare to.
Right. Also, there was a lot of lumping and splitting going on. Well, still is, right? You got with Stygimoa, Dracorex, Pachycephalosaurs.
Yep.
Bighorn sheep don't perfectly align when they're headbutting, going back to the sheep analogy. And with spherical domes, it seems hard to target. And some pachycephalosaurids had these pointed peak domes, like the quote-unquote Stenotholus. which later became Stygimoloch and then later Pachycephalosaurus. But they would miss contacting each other because the domes are just too pointed.
So it's sort of like you're running without being able to aim by looking a cone at another cone. They're going to miss most of the time. It's hard to hit point to point.
Yeah, exactly. But a lot of later studies found support for skull ramming. There was one study in 2013 that looked at 109 pachycephalosaur domes and found that 22% of those had pathologies on the dome. And of that 22%, 63% were on the top of the dome.
Huh?
So it seemed correlated with the head-to-head striking. But again, there could be a variety of combat styles, like based on the dome or the shape of the dome, the ornamentation on the dome. So in that paper, they proposed 4 types of combat, like a bison-like head shoving for those with the large, broad domes like Pachycephalosaurus. Then there's the bighorn sheep-like clashing for those with high vaulted domes like Prenocephaly. Third is the goat-like broadside or flank butting for those with the high domes and large horns like Stygimoloch and Dracorex, which both of those names are in quotes because they got lumped together with Pachycephalosaurs.
Yeah, but actually this might be one of those situations where it's good to have names for those immature versions in a way, because it's possible that as an immature or a juvenile Stygimoloch, Dracorex / juvenile Pachycephalosaurus, maybe they had a different style.
Yeah.
So maybe they flank butted when they were younger, going head to shoulder, basically. And then when they got older, maybe they went straight head to head.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, kind of like how a juvenile Tyrannosaur had a, different feeding style than an adult one.
Mm-hmm.
Just things change as you
And
get
they
older.
may not have bit each other in the face
Yeah.
completely when they were little or hard enough to leave marks.
And then the 4th style was this giraffe-style lateral necking for those with spikes on the dome, also like Stygimoloch and Dracorex. So they've got 2 options there.
Okay, so if you're not familiar with the way giraffes fight, they sort of get their bodies close together and then swing their heads around to the side and try to get those horns on the top of their head, because giraffes have horns,
Mm-hmm.
and they try to bash each other with those horns. It wouldn't be quite as impressive watching a pachycephalosaur do that since their necks are so much shorter.
Sure.
But they did have horns on the back of their head, so I guess that would make some sense.
It's never as impressive if we're saying Stygimoloch and Dracorex are the juvenile forms of Pachycephalosaurs. It's never as impressive seeing what the juveniles are doing.
As the adults.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they're more reckless, though.
That's true. There was a study in 2022 that found that Stegosaurus had muscular hip and legs, and then this muscle would have helped with headbutting. So going back to the headbutting idea.
Get a more powerful run up.
Yeah.
One other thing, you were talking about the amount of damage on the top of the head. That doesn't necessarily mean that the damage on the top of the head is from running their head into another Pachycephalosaurus
Mm-hmm.
or another Pachycephalosaurus's top of head, because it could be that they were running into a predator. If it was some sort of predator defense thing, it could just be coincidence. The top of their head is the most likely thing to run into stuff when they're walking through the woods or something like that. There's a lot of ways to injure a head.
Yeah. And along the lines of head injuries, it's hard to tell if there were brain injuries in the fossil record.
Oh, true.
Like some bighorn sheep and musk oxen do have evidence of brain injury from headbutting. That's still being studied. There's endocasts of Pachycephalosaurs, but we don't know exactly what their brains were like. So the domes may have helped disperse the shock from headbutting, but it's possible that they did get some brain damage. So back to this paper. This paper talks about the future behavior studies on Pachycephalosaur domes, and it includes modeling their vertebral column that, quote, suggests that alternatively kangaroos, not bighorn sheep, may be a better extant behavioral analog, and that's where I got very excited. And they mentioned the paper by Carrie Woodruff that's still in prep. I'll read you the title so you get an idea. It's Osteology and the Kinematics of the Pachycephalosaurid Vertebral Column Spine Provides Further Evidence Refuting the Agonistic Headbutting Hypothesis. So we are still waiting on that kangaroo Pachycephalosaur paper. But like I said, there was an article on Live Science about this a couple years ago. And so I'm going to summarize what's in that article, which is the idea that Pachycephalosaurs used their tails like tripods to prop them up and then kicked at rivals. So they had this kickboxing-like behavior. And for the paper, they made a 3D model of Pachycephalosaurus, and they found it similar to a kangaroo. And this just hasn't been discussed much because pachycephalosaur skulls preserve better and more often than their skeletons.
That's funny because we were recently talking about Velociraptor in our 500th episode and other raptors, and how originally the drawings of them were sort of them standing on one foot and slashing with their claw midair, sort of kicking and standing. And now we think actually they probably stood on top of things and sort of pinned their prey using their claws. But maybe pachycephalosaurs are going to be the ones that sort of leaned back and kicked forward with one leg up in the air.
And then maybe the dome was like a helmet and was just extra protection.
I guess. Could be.
I don't know. I'm waiting on this paper. But to the current paper that we're talking about, there's a section called All Domes Are Not Created Equally. Because, like we were saying, some domes are dense, like the helmeted hornbill, and some are hollow, which are more like cassowaries. Some are broad, some are more like spheres, and domes could be for fighting, but they can also be for display or just for signaling. So for future studies, when looking at combating with heads, the authors suggest a few things. One, you want to have a good understanding of comparative structure. Just because two features look similarly, they might be structurally different. Again, like how some domes are dense and some are hollow. So you want to talk about the makeup of the structure, like the dome. Second, you want to state which modern animals you're comparing the fossil taxa to. Third, you want to state the striking and contact surfaces, which parts of the body are giving and receiving the impact or the blows. And fourth, you want to state the velocity of the blow. As an example, you could say something like bighorn sheep-like head-to-head high velocity impact. So you know that the speed of the contact is on the higher end.
I think that is what most people imagine when you say headbutting. You think two animals, charging head first at each other, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Nope. There's the flank. It could be a slow impact.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You could be trying to get the back of the head onto them.
Yep. So yeah, that's the headbutting review. Pretty cool. But again, still looking forward to that kangaroo paper.
And we'll get on to a new dinosaur discovery in just a moment. But first, we're going to pause for a quick sponsor break.
So on to our kind of dinosaur mystery section, I'll call it. The most complete dinosaur has been found in Mississippi, but what it is exactly is still a mystery.
Okay, I was thinking, if it's the most complete dinosaur, that doesn't seem like much of a mystery.
I mean, we do know kind of what type of dinosaur it is. It's a hadrosaur or duck-billed dinosaur, but we don't know anything more specific than that. And there are a lot of hadrosaurs. It's like in the dozens. We had this whole Hootenanny episode about them. There's so many hadrosaurs.
Yep.
This particular one lived about 82 million years ago. It's estimated to be 25 to 26 feet long, or more than 7.5 to almost 8 meters long. The fossils have been in storage for a while, but now there's a grad student working on it. These were first found in 2007. They've collected about 15% of the skeleton, but they're still getting more bones out, so that should help unravel this mystery. Some of the bones are in private collections, and some are at the Mississippi Museum of Natural Science.
Oh, weird.
Yeah, I'm not sure about the story behind that. If anyone knows, let us know. There's a lot of vertebrae that they've got. One humerus, or upper arm bone, one ulna, a lower arm bone, foot bones, and a hip bone. But no skull has been found yet, which is why it's difficult to identify what kind of hadrosaur this is. But studying that hip bone, specifically the pubis, may help them because there's a lot of subtle differences between the species. I do wonder, when I was reading this, if they're going to do any histology and if that could help, because it reminded me of this recent study of fragments of bones found in the UK that scientists used to think belonged to a dinosaur until they did histology, where they cut thin slices and studied them under a microscope.
And then they realized they weren't dinosaur bones?
Not at all.
I don't remember that story.
Well, that's because I'm going to tell you now.
Oh, I see.
Because since they weren't dinosaur bones, I didn't find a way to connect it into the show until this episode.
I will say, before you get onto that, there is a decent bone that they have for histology, and that's the humerus. Because the humerus and the femur are usually two of the best bones to slice into and get stuff like lags, the lines of arrested growth, and other key details.
Well, what I learned from this study that was looking at what they thought might be dinosaur bones and found they weren't is that you get different information from histology from different bones. So the long bone, or the, like you were saying, where you get the lags and things like that, that's great for telling you the age of dinosaurs and other details too. But in this case, like with this study, it turned out it was jaw bones that let them know that it wasn't a dinosaur.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah. So this was published in Peer J by Marcello Perillo and P. Martin Sander. There's these fragments of large, long, rounded fossils from the late Triassic that were found in the 1800s in what's now the UK. It was in the Oscliffe Radic bone beds around Bristol. The late Triassic, we always talk about, it was actually most of the Triassic. It lasted about 36 million years.
Mm-hmm.
And during it, there was the Mesozoic marine revolution and the end Triassic mass extinction, which might give you a hint as to what these bones are. But there were different hypotheses on what they were. One idea was that they were giant amphibian bones. Another was that they were dinosaurian or other archosaurian long bone shafts. And the third idea was that they were giant ichthyosauran jawbone segments. This is known as the giant ichthyosaur hypothesis.
Mm-hmm.
I think I just gave it away. So for a while, they thought these bones came from a sauropodomorph or a stegosaur. It was missing the outer bone surface in some areas, which could be from being worn down, also known as abrasion. The stegosaur idea didn't make much sense because there was a lack of features, and also the largest known stegosaur in the late Triassic is just inconsistent with the known Ornithischian fossil record.
Because there weren't any Ornithischians known in the late Triassic, for example.
Yeah, there would be these long ghost lineages.
There just happened to be this huge stegosaur before we knew of any other Ornithischians, let alone stegosaurs.
Yes. Then on the sauropodomorph idea, the long bones, which can be arm or leg bones, they look uniform when cut open. Sauropods show growth marks later in life.
At least there were sauropodomorphs in Europe in the Triassic.
Yes, so they did some bone histology testing, and then they compared the bones to known ichthyosaur specimens from England, France, Germany, and Canada, because they found that the fragments weren't the same compared to dinosaurs, which meant that ruled out it being a dinosaur. Must be something else. As the author said, we do know the histology of pretty much all dinosaur clades, especially the large ones. So they had a whole section in the paper called Rejection of the Dinosaur Hypothesis.
Yeah. Presumably, you're looking for stuff like hollow bones. We have different sorts of bone texture and remodeling that happens over time.
Yeah.
If it's a long bone, you might have lags.
So rejecting the dinosaur hypothesis led them to the giant ichthyosaur hypothesis. And they're not the first ones to come up with this idea. In 2018, Dean Lomax and others found this large, long, partially curved bone segment and identified that and other fragments from this study as giant ichthyosaur jaws. And they compared it to older giant ichthyosaurs found in North America, like Shonosaurus from Nevada and Shastasaurus from British Columbia, Canada. But also in 1912, Friedrich von Huene described a 1.4 meter long bone segment from the same area. That fossil, unfortunately, has been lost. It was possibly destroyed in World War II. But he said that was part of a right lower jaw of a giant ichthyosaur. Now, giant ichthyosaurs have been found in France, Switzerland, and Germany. And late Triassic ichthyosaurs were over 10 meters long, or almost 33 feet. But they're often incomplete, fragmentary finds. And some giant ichthyosaurs are estimated to be even bigger, like 21 meters or almost 69 feet long.
Yeah, they were pretty huge.
Yeah. So going back to the histology in this study, they found shared features in the fragments and the known ichthyosaur bones, including a distinct pattern in these bones. And they found 4 features that relate to ichthyosaur jaws. For example, the way the fibers look is just distinct in the type specimen of the best known giant ichthyosaur, Shonosaurus. And they also found it had fast growth rates based on closely spaced growth marks. So I guess you can see that at least in ichthyosaur jaws.
Mm-hmm.
And they could grow large. So this unique combination of features that they found doing histology, plus their large size and a few other details, rules out any other late Triassic giant tetrapod other than giant ichthyosaurs. And when you combine these 4 features together, you don't see this in dinosaur histology. It also includes this unique bone matrix type. So they found that these large bone fragments from the cliff are fragments of giant ichthyosaur jaws. And They said that paleohistology can, quote, be used to show that dinosaur-sized fragmentary bones do not belong to dinosaurs at all.
I mean, sometimes.
Sometimes.
Sometimes the dinosaur-sized fragmentary bones are dinosaurs.
Yes. But not always.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was an interesting way to solve that mystery.
Yeah, that's cool. It's nice when they find uses for bones that are otherwise not particularly exciting, like fragments and things, and you can still learn a lot from them.
Yeah. All right, we're moving on to some listener questions. And as a reminder, if you want to submit any questions or you have feedback for us, best way to get in touch is to go to bit.ly/dino questions. So we'll answer a couple today. I want to thank Travis for sending this one in. The question was if we've ever been to the museum in Fruita, Colorado, and specifically if we've seen the feathered Utah raptor biting the head off a young sauropod. Travis says it's awesome, just awesome. And we have not. But now we have another reason to visit because there's a couple cool things in that place, like Dinosaur Hill Trailhead. It's this mile-long looping trail that takes you past dinosaur bones. And Elmer Riggs from Chicago's Field Museum dug there in the early 1900s. And in 1901, he found 2/3 of an Apatosaurus, the back 2/3. And that Apatosaurus, the ribs had a clear break mark, which showed that it healed while the dinosaur was alive. So the hike apparently takes 60 to 90 minutes, and you can see a quarry site, a mold of a dinosaur femur, and where the Apatosaurus was found.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think the closest we've been to that was Dinosaur, Colorado, which is a little ways north and right on the Colorado side of the Dinosaur National Monument, which is mostly in Utah, or at least the visitor center is.
Yeah.
But we didn't make it down to Fruita.
I don't know if we knew about it.
Probably not.
But the museum also sounds great. It's the Museum of Western Colorado Dinosaur Journey. It's about 2 miles from Dinosaur Hill, and they've got life-size models of Stegosaurus and Ceratosaurus near the entrance, as well as 8 skeletal mounts, including Camarasaurus and Othnilosaurus, and robotic dinosaurs. And then, of course, there's that Utah raptor on display. I saw a picture of it. Wow, it's intense. You've got this large, feathered, black and white Utah raptor standing over a decapitated sauropod.
Oh, jeez.
And the sauropod's head is in its jaws, so there's a lot of blood and gore.
Wow. That reminds me of some of the taxidermy we saw in Europe. That was just a little bit more metal than most of the stuff I'm used to seeing in museums.
Yeah. And apparently they updated this because it's got feathers now, but it used to be scaly.
Oh, cool.
So it's been around for a while, it sounds like. So thank you. That is on our radar for places that we need to visit. And next, thank you to Aiden E for this one. They were doing some digging on the internet and found a creature bigger than the blue whale, Patagotitan. They was wondering if we could possibly do an episode or just get back to them about it. So we have mentioned Patagotitan a few times on the show. We often talk about the one on display at the American Museum of Natural History in New York. It's so large, it's 121 feet or 37 meters long. It doesn't even fit in the room it's in.
Yeah, so they have a head sticking out of one end of it. I don't remember if the tail is in the room or if it's sticking out the other doorway.
I only remember the head sticking out and kind of looking at you.
Yep.
Although it probably wouldn't see you in real life because it's so high up.
It would probably see you.
But it wouldn't care.
Yes, that's true. Probably wouldn't care.
Yeah. The first time we mentioned Patagotitan was when it was first discovered. So that was back in 2017. That was episode 142. But I'll just do a quick overview here. It was a titanosaur sauropod. It lived in the early Cretaceous in what is now Chubut Province, Patagonia, Argentina, found in the Cerro Barcino Formation. At least 6 young adults were found, so it's pretty well known.
Yeah, and they put together multiple individuals, and I think they probably had to scale some of the bones in order to make that full skeleton that's on display at AMNH.
Yeah, it's on display in a few other places too.
Mm-hmm.
It was officially named in 2017 by Jose Carballito and others. But the fossils were found in 2010 by a farm laborer named Aurelio Hernandez, who found part of a thigh bone. And at the time, we thought it was the largest known titanosaur. That's why the model is at 121 feet, but later studies estimated it to be closer to 102 feet or 31 meters long.
Okay.
But yeah, it was still large and robust, and we know that it lived in a forested area.
Yeah. So depending on your definition of size, you could say it's bigger than a blue whale, because even at 102 feet, The largest blue whales are more like 99 feet-ish,
Mhm.
so make it longer than most, if not all, blue whales. But it certainly wasn't as heavy as a blue whale, because
Mhm.
blue whales are really big in diameter, pretty much their entire length,
Yes.
whereas Patagotitan was pretty big in the middle part, but then the long, skinny neck.
And the tail.
Yeah, the long, skinny tail. So by weight, it was a lot lighter than a blue whale.
Yes.
One more thing about Patagotitan. The really cool thing about it is how complete it is. Because like you said, there were the 6 individuals, and we have a lot of these large Titanosaur bones, but we don't have very many from well-known skeletons.
Yes.
That's the really cool thing about Patagotitan, that we have so much of it for a large sauropod. It's not just a leg bone or a full leg or anything like that. It's actually most of the dinosaur.
True. So thank you for submitting those questions. And again, anyone else who has questions or feedback for us, you can head over to bit.ly/dino questions.
And we'll get on to our dinosaur of the day, Saurornithoides, in just a moment. But first, we're going to pause for one last sponsor break.
And now onto our dinosaur of the day, Saurornithoides, which was a request from PaleoMike716 via our Patreon and Discord. So thanks. It was a Troodontid dinosaur that lived in the Late Cretaceous in what is now Mongolia, found in the Djadochta Formation. Troodontids, in general, they were small bird-like dinosaurs with a lot of teeth and closely spaced teeth in the lower jaw. And like raptors, they had sickle claws on the second toes of their feet. They were probably smart with good senses. Saurornithoides had large eye sockets and good depth perception. It also had a long, low head and a relatively large brain and long nasals, a long snout in general, and a long tail. To me, it looked kind of like a roadrunner, but much bigger, and then with large claws on its hands and feet. A juvenile Saurornithoides mongoliensis was described in 1993 with a leg that was highly ossified, is bony and rigid, which may mean that Saurornithoides was well developed when it was born and didn't need much or any parental care.
Is precocial, maybe?
Yeah. The type species is Saurornithoides mongoliensis. The genus name Saurornithoides means lizard bird form or bird-like theropod and refers to its bird-like skull. Those fossils were first found in 1923, and it was the first Troodontid skeleton found.
So they could be called Saurornithoided. Doesn't roll off the tongue quite the same.
No, it doesn't. The holotype includes a skull and jaw, vertebrae, part of the pelvis, a leg, and foot. More bones were included as the description, but it was later found that those bones were part of a protoceratopsian.
Mm-hmm.
2 other incomplete specimens were found, but they don't have enough detailed features, so we only know them as Troodontids for now. Saurornithoides was described and named in 1924 by Henry Osborn in the same paper that he named Velociraptor and Oviraptor, and in that paper, Osborn compared Saurornithoides to Velociraptor. I mean, at the time, Troodon formosus was known only from teeth, and it was thought to be a pachycephalosaurid, Stegosaurus. So that's why Osborn compared Saurornithoides with Velociraptor and suggested, quote, it may prove to have avian relationships.
And so it did.
Yeah, he also found that it had different feeding habits from Velociraptor, like it wasn't as good at seizing swift-moving prey. The skull of Saurornithoides was first thought to be a bird, and Osborn suggested it had an aquatic habitat based on details of the skull and nostrils, but you need limbs to know for sure.
Well, that's a surprise.
Yeah.
Guess.
He said it was a small running theropod, more sluggish than Velociraptor, which was swift and raptorial in habit, but remotely related to it. And he also thought that Saurornithoides was carnivorous or ovivorous, meaning it ate eggs. More Saurornithoides species were named, but now only one is considered valid, and that's the type species Saurornithoides mongoliensis. But in the past, you had things like Saurornithoides inequalis, which was Stenonychosaurus inequalis, and is now usually thought to be a junior synonym of Troodon formosus. In 1982, Kenneth Carpenter described a hatchling Saurornithoides inequalis, but now that's considered to be Troodon, based on a partial left jawbone, and said it was similar to another Saurornithoides inequalis jaw, but smaller. Some other species include Pectinodon asia americanus, which became Saurornithoides asia americanus, but then later Troodon Asia Americanus. And then there's Troodon isfarensis, which became Saurornithoides isfarensis, but now it's known to be a hadrosaur.
Really?
Yeah, not a Troodontid at all.
You don't see a lot of Troodontids, small theropod turning into hadrosaur.
Yeah. There was another specimen described in 1964. It was the first one collected by a professional Mongolian paleontologist, and it was described in 1974 by Rinchan Barsbold as Saurornithoides Jr. And since then, just more Troodontids have been found. A 2009 study renamed that particular specimen that was described in 1974 as a new genus, Zanabazar. It was named by Mark Norell and others, and they also re-examined Saurornithoides.
Zanabazar is a cool name.
It is. So, yeah, that's how they found only the type species belongs to Saurornithoides, Saurornithoides mongoliensis, but they found it's closely related to Zanabazar. In the past, Zanabazar was referred to Saurornithoides because of those similarities, and Saurornithoides was the only other well-known troodontid with a skull, and both were living in the Late Cretaceous in what's now Central Asia. But with CT scans, they found enough differences between the two, and Zanabazar is larger than Saurornithoides. Its skull is over 10 inches long versus Saurornithoides' skull, which is a little over 7 inches long. Zanabazar also has more teeth than Saurornithoides, 118 compared to 108.
It's a lot of teeth.
Yeah. And the brain case looks slightly different, and there's other details. They do still have a lot of similarities, but it could be because the similarities are plesiomorphic. They're ancestral characters, and they're shared with other troodontids too, including Troodon formosus. Other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place as Saurornithoides include ankylosaurs like Pinacosaurus, ceratopsians like Protoceratops, dromaeosaurs like Velociraptor, oviraptors like Oviraptor, as well as troodontids, alvarsaurs, tyrannosaurs, and birds. And other animals that lived around the same time and place include amphibians, crocodilomorphs, lizards, mammals, pterosaurs, and turtles. They appear everywhere.
As long as sauropods aren't around.
Even
Smash
when
them.
they are. They just get in the way.
And now we're going to get into our Dino-It-All challenge, our fourth puzzle. But first, we'll reveal the answers from our third puzzle last week. For the question of about how much does an Ankylosaurus weigh, the answer is 8 tons, because this was a bigger one. We intentionally left a lot of error bars around it.
Mhm.
The next closest was 2 tons on the low side, and it's 16 tons on the high side. And there haven't been any estimates in that range for a large Ankylosaurus, at least in a long time. And for the question of which dinosaur's pheromones should be used to scare off the Ankylosaurus, the answer was T-Rex, because Allosaurus, Carnotaurus, and Giganotosaurus all lived long before Ankylosaurus, so probably wouldn't recognize their smell. And 2 out of 3 of those, Carnotaurus and Giganotosaurus, weren't even in the same continent as Ankylosaurus. Allosaurus maybe would have made it up to where Ankylosaurus was, even though it was from the Morrison Formation, but it would have been there about 70 million years.
So it wouldn't know to be afraid of these animals.
Yeah, just like we wouldn't recognize the smell of an Ankylosaurus, it wouldn't recognize the smell of an Allosaurus. Maybe there'd be something in the pheromones that it would recognize to be afraid of, but better off going with T-Rex for sure. And we've got our winners for the fastest people to answer correctly. For the first question, going back an episode to our second Dino-It-All puzzle in episode 503, again, Skylar figured out the answer faster than anybody else, that the confused herbivore in the New Jersey suburb was Hadrosaurus. The big clue was that it was in Haddonfield, where Hadrosaurus was found. We were actually describing the suburb that has been built around the original Hadrosaurus holotype dig site, although you might have been able to figure it out from clues about what the dinosaur looked like too. And Skylar got it in only 27 minutes. The fastest patron for that week was Ollie Exists, who figured out to feed the Hadrosaurus horsetails in just 43 minutes. All of these answers coming in under an hour. It's very impressive. Then for last week's episode, the fastest person to figure out Ankylosaurus weighs about 8 tons was Brooke in just about 26 minutes. So well done, Brooke. And the fastest person to figure out that a Tyrannosaurus smell would be the best to scare off an Ankylosaurus was Clark in just 7 minutes. I have no idea how they did it in just 7 minutes, but I guess you might have been able to figure it out from the way the question was posed on Patreon without actually listening to it, but still very rapid response time for the middle of the night. So well done, Clark. And the next most common answer was Allosaurus, which might work to scare off an Ankylosaurus since it's a meat eater. So maybe there'd be some sort of smell in its urine or something that would scare off an Ankylosaurus. But since Tyrannosaurus lived at the same time as Ankylosaurus, it's probably a better bet. And for this week, we're picking up in Sturgis, South Dakota, and it's almost time for the annual Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, but this year there are more obstacles than usual. Right around the entrance of Main Street, a giant four-legged dinosaur with a long tail and an even longer neck stands in the way. This animal is having some fun and moving its neck up and down, almost like a level crossing barrier in front of a train track.
Silly dinosaur.
Who knows why? It can't even move its neck up and down that much. The highest it can go is just about horizontal, and it spends a few seconds raising its neck and then immediately lowering its neck and head back down towards the ground. Then it waits a few more seconds and repeats the cycle. The dinosaur doesn't seem to be a threat to anyone, but it is an annoyance, especially for anyone who wants to get into town. It diverts most of the traffic, which is ground to a halt, onto smaller side streets. But some of the more daring or possibly inebriated bikers wait until the neck is starting to rise before twisting their throttle and rushing under the neck before it lowers again. The dinosaur almost looks pleased, like it wants to play. The loud noise also doesn't seem to bother the dinosaur. Maybe it was hanging out near a train crossing for a while, picking up this game. Several drivers stop a few yards away to assess the situation. One of them is volunteering for the summer at the museum in nearby Hill City. That dinosaur looks familiar, he thinks to himself. I know, it's like that rearing sauropod at the American Museum of Natural History, only this one doesn't seem capable of holding its head up high. Also, if I remember correctly, that sauropod in the museum used to go by another name. So the question is, which dinosaur is this? And if you'd like to answer, you can go to bit.ly/dinochallenge505, since this is episode 505. There'll be a few answers. All sauropods. And for our second bonus scene for our patrons, it looks like the poor sauropod may have injured its neck with its antics. That long 30-foot, 9-meter neck is much better suited for moving side to side than up and down. It's still moving its neck up and down, but it seems to be in some pain. As a biker revs his engine, getting ready to blast under the sauropod's neck, the sauropod lays its neck down on the ground. The biker jams on the brakes and narrowly avoids crashing into the dinosaur. Shortly after, the sauropod kneels down, then lays down, completely blocking off the street. The dinosaur needs treatment, but no one in town is quite sure how to help it. Eventually, they decide to leave the animal in place so they don't risk exacerbating its injuries. But the museum volunteer quickly realizes that the sauropod will need a lot of food or else it might starve. There are a few types of plants in the nearby area. Which is the most likely to be food for the dinosaur? We have a few options at bit.ly/dinochallenge505 if you click the link on the bottom. Or you can go straight to Patreon. I'm not going to read out that URL because it is a lot. So good luck to everybody answering. Again, if you answer one or both of these questions, you'll be entered to win our Dino It All challenge and the prize package, which includes a large Spinosaurus tooth, courtesy of Mini Museum, an Eocene leaf fossil, courtesy of Ancient Odysseys, a signed poster, courtesy of Y Dinosaurs, and Captive's color change eggs, courtesy of Toy Monster.
There are potentially more prizes to come. We're still working out the details.
It's kind of fun, slowly increasing the number of prizes. So again, if you want to enter this week's giveaway, you can go over to bit.ly/dinochallenge505. It's all lowercase, no spaces or dashes or anything. And if you want the complete rules for the giveaway, you can go to bit.ly/dinochallenge24. I hope everyone's enjoying these puzzles as much as we enjoyed creating them.
Me too. And now onto our fun fact, which, as I said at the beginning of the episode, is that we can eat grapes and raisins and drink wine thanks to the non-avian dinosaurs going extinct. And not just because we're here.
Is it because the raisins and grapes are here?
Okay, there are certain things that had to happen, yes. But yes, it is because they're here now, and I'll just get into it. This was a paper published in Nature Plants by Fabiani Herrera and others, and they described 9 fossil grape seeds that were found in what's now Colombia, Panama, and Peru from 60 to 19 million years ago. And one of these species is the earliest known grape from the Western Hemisphere. Before that, the earliest known grapeseed fossils were found in India, and they're from 66 million years ago. So this helps show how grapes spread after the non-avian dinosaurs went extinct. The oldest grape fossil in this study was found just a couple years ago in 2022, and they could tell it's a grape seed based on its shape, size, and other key details, and CT scans confirmed it was a grape seed. The grape is Lithuva Sussmanii, known as Sussman's stone grape, in honor of Arthur Sussman, supporter of the South American paleobotany at the Field Museum. This grape appeared around the same time that rainforests developed, with the canopies and understories. Understories are between the floor and the canopy. So the large dinosaurs going away may have helped change these forests, because when they were around, they might have been knocking down trees. But when they were gone, some tropical forests could form layers like the canopy and the understory, and then these dense forests meant that plants with vines could do better.
Interesting. So there weren't any rainforest in the Mesozoic?
It doesn't sound like it.
Oh, wow. I never knew that.
That's something we might have to dive deeper into another kind of like a plant episode.
Yeah, I guess so.
Usually we're talking just about the dinosaurs.
Because rainforests are super important to humans. There's all sorts of different plants that we eat and animals that are important for medicine and things that come out of rainforests. It's hard to imagine a world without rainforests.
All I can tell you as of this episode is about the grapes.
Okay.
I can get back to you.
So they specifically said that maybe the dinosaur extinction led to the evolution of grapes?
Well, they're not knocking down the trees, so then the trees could get denser, and having more dense forests means the plants with vines can grow better.
Oh, cool.
And grapes grow on vines.
Reminds me of some of the things where you've told me about sauropods shaping landscapes in other ways, not just knocking down trees, which they almost certainly could, because even elephants today can do that. And sauropods were much, much bigger than elephants.
Yes.
But you were talking about even they might have sort of reshaped landscapes in terms of the dirt, almost like excavating valleys just by walking repeatedly in areas and things.
Possibly. And I haven't been able to find, I don't remember where I first read that anymore because I can't find studies on it.
It makes sense because in forests and stuff, there are those game trails where animals walking sort of carve out pathways. And you can imagine sometimes those areas do get a little bit lower than the surrounding area. So if an animal weighed as much as a sauropod did, it would surely create maybe like a small stream bed or something over time, over millions of years. You could imagine that developing into something larger, but that would be a hard thing to prove.
Yeah.
That might be more of a fun thought experiment like the
headbutting.
Yeah, exactly.
Which turned into serious studies.
Exactly.
Well, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Stay tuned. In our next episode, we will be talking about 2 new dinosaurs, including a new burrowing dinosaur and a new iguanodont.
Mm-hmm.
We'll also have our next puzzle in our Dino It All challenge. And if you want more details about all of that, as well as links to where to submit your answers to the puzzle, head over to iknowdino.com. Thanks again, and until next time.